Erica Djossa, welcome to About Progress.
Thank you so much for having me. I love that your community pinged me to connect us, and I'm so excited to be here.
Well, they always have the best suggestions. Last week I interviewed Casey Davis, who they recommended. And I'm like,
Um,
okay, yeah, you guys just know, you know where it's at because when I fall into your world, I just can't seem to fall back out of it. It's such an amazing community that you have built up. And we're here to talk today about why moms struggle so much in motherhood. And there's a lot of reasons. And I know that we're not here to just give blanket statements on why that is. But there are a lot of common things and threads that we all have interwoven with our own experiences with motherhood. So I would like to know for you, why have you struggled within your own motherhood journey? And why you have also seen this in women that you have both worked with personally and professionally, and what the common threads are.
yeah. It's interesting because I feel like there was this storm brewing I had three boys in the span of 3.5 years.
Oh,
And in
wow.
retrospect, I struggled to adjust with the first. I had a lot of anxiety and intrusive thoughts and trouble sleeping. The second, it was a little bit like he was a little bit easygoing. I don't know. It was a bit different. But then with my third, it kind of all came to a head, and I write about it really candidly and openly in the beginning of my book where I was trying to get the kids out the door, and I had been trying so hard to just kind of like grit my teeth and prove that I could do this motherhood thing right, air quotes,
Hmm.
and that I could keep up and I could do it perfectly and I could, like everybody else appears to be doing it. Why do I feel like I'm struggling? Why can't I do it? And this real sort of facade to feel like I had to be the one to do it all.
Mm.
And ultimately, it led to this breakdown turn breakthrough that I talk openly about. And I realized that I was suffering with postpartum depression and anxiety after my third, and probably from my first, and sort of pushing through. And that day, that moment for me to see, wait a minute, like I can't carry it all. I shouldn't have to carry it all.
Mm.
Perfect is not the goal here. It kind of just like shattered this idea of perfectionism for me and allowed me to accept that I'm human and that it's okay to struggle in this role. And I didn't know maternal mental health was a specialty at that time. I was working in children and family practice. I didn't know to be on the lookout that this is such a high risk time for onset of mental
Mm.
health challenges for mothers, for women. And so I really niched down in this space and took to social media to build my community and just create awareness and help people adjust in their role. And what I didn't expect to do was come out the other end of that and advocate for some of these areas that I see that have an impact on maternal mental health. So, the division of labor in the home being a big piece of the puzzle, also understanding that as women, our hormones and our emotions can be very interwoven, or like our mental health, not emotions in like a hystericalizing us type of way, not that, but I have ADHD, for example. And people with ADHD tend to be more sensitive to their fluctuations in hormones in their cycle,
Mm.
which impacts mood and ability to function. And so I started to really niche down and understand also how our biology and the lack of research in,
Hmm.
women's bodies and lack of understanding there is here plays such a role, because then we aren't prepared when we enter postpartum and we can struggle so significantly. But then we feel like, oh, was I not cut out for motherhood? Was I not made for this? Like, where are those instincts that I was,
Hmm.
told would show up and things? So to sum up what I think are some core factors here, the division of labor, just the high risk time biologically to struggle with our mental health during the adjustment to motherhood. And then this perfectionism piece that comes with the intensive mothering standards that we are going to touch on, that really cause us to look out and see what we think is like everybody doing it perfectly. And so we feel that we must be the only one who's struggling in our role.
And regardless of the factor, that's what I feel like I keep coming back to is the self-blame piece of how
Hmm.
easy it is for us to fall for this trap that if we aren't quote unquote mothering well and
Hmm.
that we're not thriving in motherhood or we don't find it super fulfilling, that means something's broken about us when really it's such a larger system at play that is broken, including these
Mhm.
factors that you shared, and how easily it is for people to just blame moms, to blame women,
Mhm.
and also our hysteria, for what we're lacking, and instead of seeing the bigger picture that we're living in a faulty system to begin with.
Mhm. That's one of the biggest things that I feel like I see with clients or with people who are struggling in the adjustment to motherhood and who feel like they need help or they're drowning. We often don't seek help or support because we feel like it's admitting that we are failing in our most important role. It feels like we are admitting that we are flawed in some way. And the underlying belief or assumption there is that I believe that I should be able to do it all. And
Mhm,
I'm struggling with that and I can't. So when I ask for help, I'm admitting that I'm failing. And this belief that we should be able to do it all is displayed to us as if it's on billboards everywhere throughout society, when really it is unrealistic to expect what we expect of one person. If we think back to 1950, 25 to 26% of mothers worked outside of the home. And now, not even quite 75 years later, 86 to 87% of mothers work outside of the home. And yet, the vast majority of the domestic and care work still rests in mom's domain to own, to
mhm.
be responsible for, to upkeep and orchestrate and manage and organize. Like, how did we as a generation who is mothering get defaulted into carrying all of these things? Like, it is entirely unrealistic to expect of one person.
And I mean, there's so much we can talk about with the division of labor, and I think we'll touch on it a bit. But the thing that has fascinated me the most about your work is the intensive mothering ideology.
Mhm.
And I would like to spend some time there. Can you define that for us and explain how it works?
Yeah. So, what I saw with clients who, like Eve, we were talking about off air, is a friend of mine. I love her system. I love fair play. It's such a practical tool. And then I would have clients who would take that, they would do it with a very, like a willing partner at home, and they would divide it out. And they would find within like 4 to 6 weeks, they'd be back into the default patterns in the home.
Mhm.
And as a therapist working with these moms, I'm like, what the heck? Like, what's going on here? And it really got my mind turning and to understand what are the beliefs or assumptions that cause us to default assume this labor or have it be handed to us that keep us going in this way. And sociologists have deemed this the era of intensive mothering, where every generation or society or culture has sort of a construct or a set of norms that are expected of the mothering role. And right now, the majority of that for us in, North America, Canada, US is to is this intensive mothering ideation. So what this means and what this includes is the expectation that you will give and be and do it all for your child. So that mothering should be time intensive, labor intensive,
Okay.
resource intensive, and you should freely give of yourself and your time to your child. That their needs should come before your own, and that being a good mom equals martyring your own needs for the sake of your family.
Okay. Mhm.
Um, there's also that you should be wholly satisfied with being a mom because you are best biologically suited to do this role, and this should fulfill you. And this is really kind of counter the messaging we are, or I was raised with, where it's like, women are being like liberated and can shatter glass ceilings and can go after their goals and can do all the things they want to do. Then they step into motherhood and it's like, but you shouldn't want to though, because mothering should be enough for you. That should fulfill you. You should be satisfied. And so all of this has created a really sort of perfectionist, intensive form of mothering where there are no boundaries, there are no factoring in of our needs, and there is an intense pressure that is felt to constantly be attuned to and zoomed in on our child and their needs in a very like intense or just zoomed in, ever present kind of way.
Is this something that society has this is a standard that society gave to us that we've internalized? Is that what that is? Like, it's we're doing it even though it's happened to us, we're also doing it to ourselves?
Yes. So, what this starts to look like is if you imagine a filing drawer, and we have motherhood, the label on it. And I imagine this as like you pull it and it like ever scrolls, like infinitively scrolling out, because from the time we could imagine or store memories of what it means to be a mom, we've been collecting messages into this drawer in our mind, sort of in our being. So I might see in the shows that I'm watching growing up what this mother, how she behaves and what she does. And I might be at my friend's house and see how their moms perform. And I start to form this concept of what it means to be a good mom based on all the messages that I'm seeing in society, in media and entertainment, in my family of origin, and my upbringing, culture, religion, all of those things. And so then when I step into motherhood and I go to pull on some form of like manual or guide or roadmap, I go ruffling through this drawer that is so jam packed full of junk mail that I didn't even intentionally mean to put in there,
Yeah.
but it's all of these things that I've observed and internalized over time. And this is what actually forms what we think it means to be a good mom from these external messages and the things that we've put into this drawer. But really, it's often based on those external pressures, not rooted in our values, and not really according to research what makes for healthy, thriving children, which is usually why we want to be a good mom. Like we want to raise well adjusted children and have a strong relationship with them. But many of these things usually are not directly tethered to that in any kind of way. They usually actually equal domestic labor, being good at domestic labor, keeping house well, keeping well behaved, well manicured children. And they really are not really tethered to anything of substance usually.
It's fascinating how easy it is to slip into those definitions without us defining it for ourselves. And I think it would help to know what the research does say about it so that maybe for our first step is to redefine what does it look like to be a good mom? What does research tell us about that?
Yeah. So it doesn't specifically say good mom because that's so subjective, right?
Sure.
But what it means, like, we want to have well adjusted, healthy children. And what is required in order to do that? A healthy, well mom is one
Mm,
of the key ingredients of this equation. And somebody who is dependable and reliable over time, who is like a safe space that your child knows that they can return back to at any time that they need something. So there's a safety, a trust,
hmm,
and it is about showing up over time in a
okay.
reliable and dependable way. So it's not about the quantity of time that I'm going to sit down and give you all of my attention all today and feel like I need to be zoomed in and on every moment. It's that they know consistently they're going to get their 5 magic minutes with you at bedtime where they have your undivided attention and you're going to talk to them about the friend who pushed them at daycare or whatever it is, right? So it's really about that relationship with them over
Mm,
time. But really, what I
yeah.
hear people when they're evaluating themselves, being a good mom means really like it's not really equated to any of those things usually.
I have a friend, Dr. Julie Hanks, who talks about this a lot that mothering is not a role, it's a relationship. And that's what you
Mm.
just described to me. It's so fascinating to get the research that backs it up. It's the relationship. And when I think about my mom, she parented 7 kids and a lot of it solo parenting because my dad had a very intense job. And she was that mom. She was just
Mhm.
like, I always knew she was there. I wouldn't say she was a helicopter mom. It was constantly in my orbit and like taking care of everything for me. I was telling a friend the other day that I, like, went all of 7th grade not wearing a bra because I didn't know I was supposed to. Like, I just didn't
Mhm.
know yet, like, things like that, but it wasn't because she wasn't in my business all the time, but she was there. So it's helping me see, "Oh, that's what matters." It's that
Mhm.
relationship. How fascinating. Okay, well, this
Yeah.
is oh, go ahead, please.
No, and one other thing I'll add to this is that that relationship doesn't require us to be perfect. I think a lot of us think of our relationship with our child as this fragile thing that can crack and shatter at any
Mhm.
moment. But I like to envision it as being a rubber band that has some flexibility and some give to it for us to be human, for us to make mistakes, for us to, maybe lose our cool and repair. And it doesn't have that like rigidity or fragility to it that it feels like it has in these
Mhm.
high stakes moments or when we lose our cool and we're really feeling down on ourselves, right? So that's also important to note because it's so counter this cultural message of mothering being nurturing, patient, kind, and doing this in such a perfect way for fear of harming or traumatizing our child, right? Like that's just, it's unrealistic, one. And two, again, not based in any kind of research about how real relationships play out over time.
Mhm. I'm thinking about even relationships outside of parenting, like my marriage relationship is not perfect, but it's
Mhm.
good, and that's what we need. That it's not the goal. It's not perfection. So with that, I feel like we've gotten some good information. I think it's always helpful to know the truth so that we can remove the self-blame and understand there's bigger things at play. And that can feel really illuminating, but also slightly hopeless, because it can feel
Mhm.
like
Yeah.
overwhelming. Well, how can I fix society? Or how can I fix how the division of labor is happening in my home like overnight? Like that's a lot. And I'm the one who's going to have to figure that out. Whew. So let's just take a deep breath here. And I would like to move into some things they can begin to do today that can help them, strengthen this relationship we've been talking about, to find more fulfillment in motherhood, to feel like they are struggling less, both personally and in their motherhood. So, what would you say are some tangible ways they can start to make progress in that journey today?
Mhm. One of the first steps that needs to happen is making the invisible visible. And I call this in the book my aha moment, where I saw the invisible tasks that are underneath the iceberg for the first time in a real tangible way. We get handed this invisible backpack of all of these essential tasks that are undervalued, not seen, but we must carry them. And they're default handed to mom a lot of the time. And we feel the weight of them. Like we feel the weight of the responsibility. Like anyone who I speak to can describe the almost smothering feeling that that can come with. And it grows exponentially with the more children that you have. But to articulate it, to know what it is exactly we're talking about because it's not one big task. It's like 1,000 tiny little cognitive tasks that are hard to sum up. So in the book, I actually create what are called load maps, where I try to take some of the labor of figuring out how to express this off of your hands and I map out the invisible pieces of being the one that feeds the family or being the one who manages laundry or these kind of like key components of childcare and household labor. And when you make that visible, one, you can be compassionate with yourself and say, "Holy smokes, look at the volume of things I'm carrying." And then two, you have this concrete list of things that you manage that are now a jump off point to have some constructive conversations with your partner about who is going to take ownership over what. And that is the other piece here practically is to just pause for a moment and ask yourself, how did I get ownership over these tasks to begin with? Was there a conscious conversation that we had? Did I default kind of autopilot assume this labor and same with my partner because these are how roles were modeled for us? Were these tasks assigned to me and I'm like pulling them out of the backpack realizing, "Wait a minute, my signature was forged on here. Like I didn't subscribe myself to this." And just entertaining unpacking that for a moment, what we'll usually see is that we, on autopilot, step into these norms and roles, these parenting roles, and without question, because this is like the air we breathe, this is the water we're swimming in. We don't think to even evaluate how we're going to do these things initially. And that's understandable. And part of my book is to be that guide to help you do that so that, you have a roadmap forward and don't feel like you're free falling without any structure or direction.
And I would love some examples of those icebergs that you talked about. How there's a tip of the iceberg, like something that we can see on the outside, like maybe signing our kids up for sports or, or whatever it may
Mhm.
be, but what's underneath the iceberg. So can you give us a couple of those iceberg examples?
Yeah. I talk about one, my aha moment in the book. It was over a mountain of laundry that I had. I was 8 to 10 weeks or so postpartum with my third. And like, young children, and we were a family of 5. My husband would wash the laundry, transfer it to the dryer. My role was to fold and put it away. And it must have been several weeks, and this mountain is just growing, kind of staring me in the face. And every time I walk by it, I'm like, what kind of capable adult can't just fold laundry and put it away? Like, why is this so difficult for me? And like, would berate myself or be self critical. And it wasn't until I stepped into curiosity to say, why am I struggling with this so much? What is my resistance here that I can't get myself to do this task? It turns out that it was a changeover in season. So I had to rotate all 3 of the boys' dressers
Mhm.
from one season to another. I had to get clothes from the basement to start to rotate the sizes, write a list of what was needed, what we didn't have for each size, go and source those items to make sure they had it. And before I realized it, I had 4 to 6 hours of physical, tangible labor to do as a result of just trying to fold and put that laundry away. And that is just one example of so many tasks that we manage in the home that come with this depth of cognitive planning, researching, anticipating, sourcing of things before we even get to the physical folding and putting away of the laundry itself.
Another one that comes up a lot for me in my community is feeding the household.
Mm.
Even beyond just taking stock of what's in the pantry and meal planning and shopping and prepping and all of that. Evrosky talks about this in her book about carrying around the mustard preferences in your head of every family member. Like you're
Mhm.
mentally knowing, oh, so and so doesn't like this brand, or oh, they don't like this food, so it's so much more than we ever really
Yeah.
think.
And if you do all of that labor, like if you do the researching of all the recipes, the creating of the inventory list and the tracking of all the lists, and the planning of what meals are going to happen what days, making sure all the ingredients are there. And you can consider preferences and you even plan out what dinner is going to be tonight. Asking your partner to make the dinner is like the least of the tasks because it is a like 20-minute physical dedicated task that then you can walk away from. And then you're left still to manage, okay, now we're out of this because this was used up. And then we're back into that cycle again. And that is work. That is labor. That is valuable. Many of our partners get paid, whether it's project management or managerial roles, to fulfill this type of labor that they are capable of doing in workplace environments. So it's not for lack of they can't do it, or they might not see it because they might not have been expected to see it. And that's why I help to make it visible so you have a place to really concretely discuss and plan through. But they are capable. It's just that they haven't been expected to do it in the same way that we have.
Mhm. So for those who have been doing some of this work and they're making the invisible visible and they're questioning how they got ownership of these tasks,
Mm.
what other tips can you give them on how to move forward with that information?
Yeah, through recognizing your values and holding the now what you see, this invisible labor, up to your values and seeing whether it aligns. Is it an external pressure you feel, or is it something that really is in alignment with what you feel like you need to do in motherhood? So, like, obviously, we're talking about laundry and feeding. These are essential components that we
Yeah.
can't scrap, but there are potentially things about them that we can change up, like your guest, Casey Davis. And I've had her on and had some great conversations and cite her in the book talking about keeping house. Like, we can maybe scrap some of the societal rules about how laundry should be done and just kind of like my kids have their clothes in baskets in their closet in a way that is just more functional for all of us. So we
Yeah.
can like start to emphasize function versus these external pressures. But then also going through our values and understanding what is important to us and what a good mom means to us, then we can determine whether some of these external expectations even need to be carried at all. Like, I think about, I don't know, big birthday parties or big, like Pinterest worthy, like lunches or just things where maybe you do them and you sincerely enjoy them and all the power to you. Like, I love to plan a birthday party, but now my kids don't want me to because they want to do their own thing and I
Yeah.
can't control it like their 1-year-old birthday. I could, right? But I love to plan and do things like that and curate it, but I also cannot do it, and it doesn't feel like it weighs in on my worth as a mom, or
Mhm.
I'm not failing because I didn't do the whole big production for the birthday. We just did pizza and movies and a sleepover or something, and it doesn't change my value and my worth. So there's a lot that we are carrying that is not essential, that we don't need to be carrying based on, things we see and the expectations of others. And then there is some work that we can do even in the essential things that we are carrying that we can either streamline or make more functional for us in a way that works for our family versus trying to adopt something that wasn't built for us.
Mhm. So much of what you're describing here feels like a dance. And, often an internal one, starting here, starting with what we can control the most, which are our own expectations of ourselves, our own values, our own decisions about where we're going to stay in alignment with those, determining what's essential and non essential. And then it moves into outward changes. And this is where, you literally wrote a book on all this. So we're just going to say that's a whole other conversation on what to do from there. And I would advise them to check out your book, Releasing the Mother Load. But I do want to touch on one big factor, and it's kind of
Mm,
the elephant in the room almost, for many of us who have a partner. And most often in my community, that's a husband who to pass off what is not essential or essential but can be done by someone else. That is a whole other ball game that
mm,
women are so needing to go there, but so terrified of doing it
mm,
because of the disruption it will cause within relationships, the worry over them being unwilling, the other another whole task that they have to manage themselves of distributing the labor. Whew, it's a lot. So
mm,
I just want to ask you what you would say to the women who are scared of that giant piece of this puzzle.
mhm. It's interesting because you're describing a pattern in which there is an overfunctioner and an underfunctioner, right? And it's not always in the underfunctioner's best interest to step into functioning more in a partnership or relationship. There is more required of them. But more being required of them is not a bad thing. It actually builds their confidence in their role, it builds their relationships with their children. And the question of whether a partner is willing or not is one that comes up a lot in conversations I have with people. And the experience working with the families that I've worked with is that the vast majority of partners or fathers have been willing, but they show up in a way that it's like, how can I help? Give me a list and I'll support you. And they don't realize that the real need here is ownership over the domain versus support within the domain.
Mhm.
And so I think that when we go through releasing the motherload or go through doing some of the work ourselves, then we can have more productive conversations. There's also another piece of this where if I think that being a good mom means doing these things, this is tethered to my identity and my role as a mom, then when I ask you to do it or I hand it over to you or you take ownership over it, and then, with my husband, and then you put hot dogs and something on the table, which we have hot dogs all the time. I'm not bashing hot dogs, but like, and it's not what I expect or think that it should be, then it feels like a reflection on me. It feels like I'm failing in some way, and I'm gonna step back into that labor and I'm gonna pick it back up. So there's this dance that happens between willing partners, but us also not having done this identity work, that we cycle through this
Mhm,
pattern
mhm.
often. And so there's some identity work that we have to do to be able to have the tolerance that we need to build to release some of this. And then there's also the making it visible and having these constructive conversations with our partner so that they can understand that there is an ownership component here. I
Okay.
don't want to be your delegator. I don't want to be your manager. I want you to see this labor now that it's mapped out here for you and to own it. And I don't want to have any piece in carrying that. And so there's a couple of pieces here, but it's hopeful to me that a lot of the people I speak with, there is a willing partner. And for those who aren't and are not with a partner who is willing, then we have bigger relationship challenges that we need to be, speaking about or seeing somebody about, because if they're not valuing your position in the family or the work that you do, or, not supporting you, whether it's emotionally, physically, whatever, psychologically, then that becomes what needs to be addressed more than the division of labor initially, because that, we need that support and need to have that teamwork established.
I'm grateful you'd be frank about that because, uh, it's almost good for women to know that if they can't fix that part of this dance so quickly, or if it doesn't happen overnight, that it's not that there's not hope for your relationship, it's just that there's deeper identity, issues within a relationship that almost need to be taken care of. And that will give you the path forward to make bigger change over time. And while that can be really scary because the end may be unknown, honestly, in my experience, and I would say both personally and professionally, what happens in the long road is so much better. So
Hmm.
much good awaits. And maybe
Yeah.
that's where we need to end, is to give them that little target that they're moving towards. What changes when we're able to let go of what we've internalized ourselves about what it means to be a good mom, when we're able to do away with the non-essentials, when we're able to pass off and better distribute this labor that we have taken on? What are they looking forward to?
Hmm. I'll just add that while we are in that figuring out of our relationship, or even if we're solo, single
Mm-hmm.
parent, there are still things that we can unload and do in the interim that,
Okay.
are a life raft for us. Like we don't have to maintain this stance of drowning while waiting on our partner to figure out. There's a lot that we can release independently outside of that in that process. So just asterisk that, and the book
Thank
takes
you.
you through that. So in doing this work, it's kind of like, yes, there is some unlearning to do up front, right? And for sure in the throes of early postpartum or any time of mothering, it doesn't necessarily sound appealing to have one more thing to figure out or to work on. And I faced that. But when we do this work, we are laying down boundaries and patterns that free us over time. So I stepped into motherhood and I did not have any like awareness that my time would be spoken for. It would be spoken for in domestic labor, it would be spoken for in care work, and all of that would be so consuming that there would be no space left for anything else. And it's not even because it was consciously decided, like that's just what was expected or how the cookie crumbled based on these norms that we talked about. So in challenging these norms and these patterns and redistributing or even just letting go of, frankly, some of the things that are expected, we buy our self capacity and space. We buy back our time, and then like we get this pocket for ourselves to, whether it's rediscover our identity, explore our hobbies and interests. I built an entire platform and company out of that space. And if I didn't redistribute that labor, there would have been no capacity or brain space for that whatsoever. And that what that looks like and how that gets used and what pulls you in when you buy that time back is so unique to every person, but it frees up your space to play, become curious, find yourself again, and do something for you that just in turn makes you show up in your role in a more satisfied and happy and fulfilled way.
And to me, that's the number one word there, is that fulfillment, happy and fulfilled. and how that can look so different for each of us. I think if anything, they can have that permission from you that mothering gets to look as different as there are mothers, like as many mothers.
Mhm.
And it's more about you and your relationship, your experience with it, and how that's going to trickle down to your family. This has been phenomenal. I want them to check out your book, Releasing the Mother Load. Is there anything about the book you would like them to know? Just based off of this conversation, how is it the next best step for them?
I walk you through it. I act as your guide. I'm not leaving you free falling. I'm not leaving you with
Yeah.
questions and then not providing some solutions for you. So it is a really like thoughtful, tangible guide to help walk you through these assumptions. So if you feel like you want to do this work and you have no idea where to start and it feels maybe a little bit chaotic in this moment, I am like your kind and reassuring coach through this journey. And I call out the assumptions, I give you the reframes, and I try to do as much of this work for you along this journey as possible because we're just going for that end result of you finding yourself again and buying back some of that space. So it doesn't have to feel so hard. I support you throughout the process.
Okay, I love that practical guide to move you through all of it. Fabulous. And also, you have a podcast and an Instagram platform that they should know about. Can you tell us more about those and where they should head?
Yeah. So Momwell podcast, Momwell on Instagram, momwell.com. And that is my maternal mental health platform. We've got specialized therapists across Canada and the US that help to support moms and families. Lots of free content and downloads to support your adjustment to motherhood and beyond.
Fabulous. Okay, Erica, we always end with a final question. We've talked a lot and we've covered a lot of ground here, but is there one thing you would recommend they can do based off of this conversation? What would that one small thing be?
Hmm. It's really that ownership. Like, pull that invisible backpack in front of you, open it up, start to take out even just one task and say, did I put my name on this or was this assigned to me? Even just one small thing. And just start there. And then maybe each day or once a week, you take out another task and you question where that ownership came from. And honestly, that will just change things in such big ways.
Thank you. Oh, I've enjoyed my time so much with you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Okay, that's it. I'll stop the recording here. That was so good.
Um, and so in terms of sorry, I'm gonna pause and
Target.
remember your question. Yes. Um, you're talking about sorry, change, target, where we're headed. Oh, why?
Yeah.
Like essentially
What's on the
why we're
other
doing all
side?
this.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
How will things get better?